So we're going to talk about water and how it intersects with our economy. And before I introduce you to our panelists, let me just say a couple words to tee up the discussion, give a little background context on California's economy. Probably I'm not going to say anything new to you, but it's good to have this as our reference for our conversation. So, California is a really big, complex, and an expensive state. And if we look at the top line numbers or the headline numbers, it's doing really well right now in terms of its economy. So it's the fifth largest economy in the world. We bounce back and forth between 5 and 6. We're 5 right now. We're the center of the tech revolution. We have the largest agricultural production in the nation. And we're outperforming the rest of the country in terms of job creation and growth, in terms of manufacturing, personal income, corporate profits. So on all of these metrics, we're doing really well. And you could say that California is sort of the shining star in terms of economic performance right now. But I'm an economist, and so, it's the dismal science, and there's a but. And the but is that, affordability in California is a very significant issue. Our cost of living is one of the highest. Only New York and Hawaii have higher costs of living than California does. And only Hawaii has higher housing costs. And one really can ask, do you need a house in Hawaii? But here, we have these very high costs. Our tax burden is one of the highest in the nation. And, we have affordability issues that are very concerning. So in PPIC's last public opinion survey, 66% of respondents said that housing affordability is a major issue in their area. And so in our last election, our election last week, voters did pass several large bonds to address housing, homelessness, health care. We also voted to keep in place our fuel taxes and vehicle fees to fund transportation. But as Ellen mentioned, voters rejected Proposition 3, which would have provided approximately $9 billion for water infrastructure, for stormwater management, for environmental restoration protection, for a range of water supply initiatives and management actions. And this, as she said, was the first time that voters had rejected a water bond since 1990. So it was a long winning streak, and then Prop 3 really did not get over the hurdle, whereas many other of the bonds that were addressing some of our other growing challenges, really which are manifestations of our economic success, they did pass. So to me, it raises a couple questions, and I have them here just so I don't forget them. But the question one is, does this signal a change in California's priorities? Water, as Ellen pointed out, is often in the top, particularly if you cue the question with respect to environmental issues, then water often comes up to the top. But are water issues still a major concern among voters? And then really what this panel is about is what's the nexus between local and state water policy and these other pressing economic issues? And that's really what I want to talk with the panel about today. So let me introduce our guests. So we have 4 experts here to discuss these topics. And right next to me is Denise Fairchild. She's the president of Emerald Cities Collaborative, and that's a national organization that's working to advance green development. And we have Hala Razak next to her, who's the general manager of Inland Empire's utility agency. So she's right on the front lines of dealing with a rapidly growing region that is also dealing with water scarcity and a number of other issues. We have Dan Dunmoyer, who is the president and CEO of California Building Industry Association, so think houses. And then we have Lorelei Oviatt, who's the director of Kern County's Planning and Natural Resources Department. And like Hala, she too is on the front line of dealing with a lot of these growth challenges that are, constantly stressing our infrastructure and our resources. So that's our group, and the way this is going to work, you can learn more about each of our panelists in your brochure or in your program as well. But the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask several questions that we've prepared for our panelists, and I'm going to direct them to specific panelists or a couple panelists, as well as have some general group questions. And then we have a lightning round, which will be exciting, a lightning round question where they get to each answer the same question. And then we're going to open it up to the audience and let you ask your questions of our panelists. Okay, so my first question is for Dan, and it's really to get at this housing question and affordability question. And I'm going to give you a two-part question because really it's about approaching it from two different ways. The first is, so obviously more housing, I say this obviously as an economist, more housing is clearly a priority in many parts of California. So from your perspective, what role can the housing sector play in creating more housing without risking a community's water supply reliability? That's the first part. So coming at it from your perspective, how can the housing sector contribute to that issue? And then secondly, what impact are water efficiency regulations and water system connection fees and charges having on housing costs? So looking at it from the other direction, how are these charges and regulations impacting the cost of housing, which obviously is an issue in this state?
Thanks, David. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Representing the California Building Industry Association, we have about 3,000 home builders in our organization, and we build about 85% of the homes. So just some quick numbers on where we are as a state. This year, we're going to pull about 123,000 permits to build homes. Just to keep up with population, we need to pull 180,000 permits. The last decade, we've averaged only 75,000 new homes in California per year, so you're seeing where we're falling behind. And if you take the Ledge Analyst's office or Gov Newsom or Governor-elect, the housing need ranges from the low side of 2 million housing units to the high side of 3.5 million. Mr. Newsom has chosen the number of 3.5 million. So just to kind of set the table of where we're at. That being said, when you ask people who have a house and live in a neighborhood if they want more housing around them, most of them say no. And most of them say no because of the impact on transportation and secondarily on the quality of life. So David, to your questions, a couple things we can do. Right now we are building the most energy efficient, seismically safe, and water conservation oriented homes in the United States. And other than a few Japanese areas, probably in the world. And so when we build new homes, we actually build them in a very conservation oriented manner, both inside and outside. So both state law and regulations that Mr. Brown put in place during the drought require that any outside irrigation be drought resistant and any inside construction be basically water conservation oriented. So new homes actually create the solution on basically living in a much more conserving fashion. There's still 13 million homes out there that are not living in a conservation fashion. So incentives to basically work towards simple things of toilets and other basic water conservation efforts, incentivizing that would do a lot just to maintain a better position. On the issue of regulation, David, to that second half of the question, what can we do? A couple things. I mean, we are heavily regulated in this state. You obviously know the terms of CEQA and water regulation, but we're stopping to build homes in California when it starts to rain. Now, some of you would say that means you're building all the time, but generally speaking, if you make a mistake now when you build a home, what I mean by that is you prepare the land, you start to build, and it rains. the runoff from clean sediment, we're not talking toxic soil, we're just talking dirt, the sediment, into a drain can cost you 7 figures. What I mean by that is, let's say it's raining hard and the water goes down and those little hay bale things that are around the drains, somebody captures some water and shows sediment. It is not uncommon for the fines associated with that sediment runoff to exceed the profitability of that entire construction. So when we look at regulation, we need to find, as my former boss, as Governor Schwarzenegger would say, we need to find that sweet spot. How do we regulate to ensure water quality and water safety, but do so in a manner that allows us to build, and allows us to build? Because right now we do have the highest housing cost, as David mentioned, outside of New York City and Hawaii. In San Francisco, the cost is 7 times the national average, and even in Sacramento we're above it, and we're one of the more affordable places to live. So finding that balance on regulations, making sure we protect our water sources, but also making sure that we don't create so much regulation that the cost to build really prices out the middle class. And this one last statistic, we did support the housing bond, which does provide around $4 billion. That builds approximately 8,971 homes at the current cost of building affordable housing. Again, our number that we need in the state is 3.5 million. The number we need, this is the number that blows your socks off, but the amount of money we need invested, and we think this is primarily private, not public, it's about $1.8 trillion in housing to meet the need. So nothing, and we're very supportive, we financially supported the bond, but it gives you a sense from an economist's perspective, $4 billion versus $1.8 trillion. I mean, that does require a lot of private sector involvement. Thanks, David.
So, Laura Lee and Hala, just to follow up on some of Dan's comments, you both are coming from some of the fastest growing regions in California, the Central Valley, the Inland Empire. From your perspectives, how can we accommodate the growth that Dan's talking about while ensuring safe, reliable, and affordable water service? And why don't you go first, Laura Lee, and then we'll ask Hala. Lorelei, sorry.
Lorelei, that's okay. That's all right. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about land use. So Sigma is completely focused, and I even noticed that the PPIC is focused on reservoirs and dams, and it's time to focus on land use. We're going to have, just in Kern County, over 250,000 acres of land, which was productive with almonds, pistachios, and other things, where they will have no water. There's never been a time in the state of California where land has had literally no water. It's just not happened. Sigma has changed that forever. Land use has changed. So one of the things that we're looking at as a county from a land use perspective is, I'm supposed to be building houses. HCD said I was. I have disadvantaged communities. I have no water. We have got to start talking about land use. We have got to start having state agencies in the legislature realign housing law, realign these requirements to build housing, the Williamson Act, cleaning up water. We have got to get into action, or we are not going to be building houses in the Central Valley. And so those are some of the things that are kind of suddenly now starting to come up from Sigma and from these allocations that are being creative. And at the bottom of this is a county that still has to keep a library open. I still have to respond when someone says 911. And essentially we're losing the ability to have that land be productive for anything but a drive-through wildlife refuge. And while I don't have a problem with a wildlife refuge, I have a lot of them already. So part of what we're looking at is new innovative land uses. How can we monetize this land when you don't have water? We're looking at renewable energy alternatives such as solar. Maybe this would be a good place for covered composting parks. All of you urban people want to send your composting food that's left over, and I don't think we're going to be building them in Beverly Hills. So I think we're going to be looking at these types of new land uses, but what we need is streamlining. And the second part of this with affordable housing is the Central Valley has as much in common with South LA. They have more in common with South LA and some of the issues of water availability, as well as not being able to afford your water and your water's turned off or other things like that. We actually we need to reach out to those urban areas and create coalitions. But the one thing that has to change is the idea that there's plenty of water and all you have to do is get him to build it.
So Hala.
So at the Inland Empire Utilities Agencies, we manage kind of a populations providing water and wastewater services for about 875,000 people. That population is right now expected to grow to over 2 million people in another 20 years. The growth is phenomenal, and all you have to do is come visit my region to see that construction is going on everywhere. So the thing that has worked and we will be needing to do more of that is really partnering with the developers in the region. We have Lewis Homes, for instance, who's literally partnered with our conservation folks to figure out what are the best ways to come up with irrigation for landscaping, the models that are being sold, what kind of landscaping they should have. And this ongoing discussion and conversation is absolutely critical. It's really important to think of water management. It used to happen where a water manager, mostly our engineers, would go into a dark room and make sure that the pipes are running. Well, we cannot operate like this anymore. It is absolutely critical to talk to the residents, involve the developers in what we're doing, and the County of San Bernardino has these yearly conferences where they invite, or more like drag, all the water managers, and they talk about how well are you doing with your water planning? What's going on with your water resources? What can we really do to help? And oftentimes, the people who attend these conferences are obviously developers, BIA representatives. So it's really important to work collaboratively. The other thing that I wanted to say is that in the region, we're going outside of the norms that we did in the past. There's an agency called SAPA that is really kind of a collection of all the regional water agencies. And collectively, we look at the whole region, and it's a fairly large region, and find creative ways to do projects that will lower water use, increase water supply, and in general, really make the region more sustainable. We're one of the few regions in the state of California that during the drought, the 5-year drought, the water supply that we had locally, in fact, increased, not reduced, because of the great job that is been done over there. All the leaders in the region are very concerned about any curtailing of development, so they're working really hard and talking to everyone. And I really go and support what Ellen said, the importance of having a positive outlook on the future. I mean, woe is me with climate change and everything else. But if you think about it, we here in California are very creative. Since 1967, the output of the use of 1 gallon of water has tripled within our industries and so on. And if you look at the water use, it has come down dramatically. I mean, in San Diego, where I was before, since 1984 until now, the region increased over 400,000 people, and water use in totality has come down. And we've really also seen what the public does when you talk to them and put the pressure. Water use dropped by 25%. So we just need to be smarter about planning into the future, plan by building a lot of water, but not make it so that people can start using water with no limits.
So I want to follow on some of this conversation with a question for Denise. Our other panelists mentioned that we need to come up with collaborative approaches that involve the community. So at Emerald Cities, that's really what you focus on, creating sustainable and inclusive economic opportunities. And I'm wondering if you can give us an example of how we can invest in water projects, but also ensure that local communities are involved and benefit from these investments.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, you know, I like the way you ended your comments about how we think about our water crisis, because I look at this as, and Emerald Cities does, as a sort of the glass half full. And we look at the crisis as an opportunity to reimagine, re-engineer, and rebuild America and its infrastructure. And we look at it in a way that is about how do we green our cities and our rural communities, and at the same time, create economic opportunities that create jobs, family wage jobs, business opportunities, investment opportunities, and then lastly, ensure equity, that all communities are included in this new sort of water economy that we're growing. So that's the work that we do. We look at this as triple bottom line: environment, economy, and equity. And it's an opportunity, even though it's also a challenge. And so one of the things that we've been doing, we've been working in the energy space as well as in the water space, and I actually want to address some other questions, but the reality is, if we really take this opportunity to rebuild California's water infrastructure, we are recognizing that it has great job generation potential. We currently, throughout the United States, we've got 1.7 million jobs in the water sector, at all elements of it, from the construction, the operations, the maintenance. At the end of the day, most of the folks that are in the water sector are, in fact, aging out. All right, so it's a silver tsunami that's happening in all of our sectors. But if we are, and I'm part of that silver tsunami. But if we are,
I'm looking around the room.
if we are recognizing that the water sector itself is one of the largest economic sectors of our economy. Secondly, that it pays above average wages for individuals, and even at the entry level, 50% of the jobs pay above average wages, and that folks are aging out, then that means we have a job creation opportunity with no pipeline. There are very few individuals that are looking to work with utilities or working to work in the construction industry. And so how do we actually pump that up? That's part of what we're doing in our work. Some of the initiatives that we're looking at, for example, even in Los Angeles, we did pass Measure W, which is essentially our parcel tax to actually do stormwater management projects in our communities. We're looking at this as an opportunity to train young people, high school folks, on all aspects of natural flood management and stormwater management opportunities, aligning that with STEM careers, and then ultimately exposing them, working with utilities and folks that are contractors that are in the community to get the experiential learning opportunities so that we can actually motivate them, excite them, number one, to get out of school, two, have strong STEM capabilities, and then enter into the field. So we should also look at the investment in new water infrastructure as a way to, that is not, to grow the economy. The question is, how do we pay for this? One of the interesting opportunities that we've been able to do in Portland, Oregon, is actually put a 1% fee, and I know we're talking about taxes and what have you, but if you want something, if you want inclusion, if you want small business development and local economic development, you really have to pay for it. You just can't expect it to come out of nowhere. So we have a 1% fee attached to a $100 million water project in Portland that provided $1 million for community organizations to participate in actually outreach and training and getting folks involved out of the communities into the water infrastructure development. So these are some of the efforts that we've been doing in Los Angeles County. We have passed a local hire policy which says that wherever you're building this water project, make sure that 20–30% of the participants are from low-income communities that get a chance to be a part of this new economy. Currently, 85% of folks that are working in the water sector are males, very few females. Most of them are white and don't represent the demographics, the changing demographics of our state. So we have to really change all of these issues. And the idea, Lorelei, of actually forming coalitions between rural and urban communities, disadvantaged communities, is something that's really needed to figure out how we engage our communities in this new water future.
Thank you. So, Lorelei, you did mention Sigma in your earlier comments. What are some of the barriers or opportunities to integrating water issues into the other decision-making processes of land use planning, such as connecting Sigma efforts to land use planning in the San Joaquin Valley? What's the glass half full side of this story, and also what's the glass is half empty side of this story?
Well, of course, Sigma was exempted from CEQA. So as we go through and we create these plans, that streamlines things. But the general plan isn't exempt from CEQA. So one of our challenges right now is to get policies established for this new world of land use. Land use has changed because of Sigma. We need to change those policies. So one of the things we're doing is we've actually created a water element. We think this is the way to go. We think that water as an overarching issue needs to have new policies. How do we integrate water trading into development? We have places in Kern County where we already have policies that if you want to build houses, you find these lots of little lots that will probably never build, and you get that water transferred. So we've already kind of dipped our foot in this, and it works. You have to give the development community options. They are very, very smart and very, very innovative. What you can't do is a one-size-fits-all. We have to give them options, and so we're going to be doing this through the water element. The glass half full is that those are things that we can integrate, but it is not a quick process. And just like every place else, Kern County is booming. We are booming with commercial and industrial and e-commerce and all of the exciting things and producing thousands of jobs. So part of what we are hoping that the new governor and the legislation will look at is helping us streamline ways to get those policies changed. We need to look at new policies for the Williamson Act and how we can repurpose those lands. Not to take away the Williamson Act, which is really, really important to agriculture, but what happens when you can't grow anything anymore and we need to use that land for something else? Those are the types of land use issues that we're excited about. We think this is a half-full kind of conversation. We just notice that land use is not a big enough conversation around water yet. And we land use planners talk about this all the time. We have purposely stayed out of it. We've let all the engineers talk about their hydrogeology allocations and data mining and you know, all of that stuff. But it's time. We have to now get into the land use side. And property rights, I have had meetings on this with people where people get up and quote Thomas Jefferson to me and call me, they say, I really like you, Lorelei, but you're a communist, okay? This is my land and it's my water. Well, now it's the state of California, all of our water. These are very hard conversations to have, and it's time for us to start having them, including communities, because the disadvantaged communities, their issue really does become their voice is not sometimes strong enough to cut through all of these big water districts and everyone who care, but what they say is, don't worry about it, it's only 80 acre-feet, it'll all get taken care of. I don't know. I want to make sure it's taken care of. I want to make sure that the people who live in these small communities actually can drink their water, turn on their tap, and I don't have to red tag their houses. And that's where we were at in the last drought. So I think that this kind of collaboration, these kinds of conferences, is the glass half full.
So Dan, I'd also like to ask you your perspective on Sigma and how it intersects with the building industry and what you guys see coming down the road.
So a couple thoughts on this. I mean, really do want to support my colleagues here in the concept of local and regional collaboration and integration. And I think this applies to all aspects, Sigma and others as well. I mean, we build, and 90% of our interaction is local. So I know there's a lot of legislation that raises questions there because there are local governments that are not looking to build any more housing. And so the state legislature is getting impatient. Governors are getting impatient saying, should local control be really, taken away? And for us, it really has to be that balancing act. So when you look at some of these different issues on Sigma, you look at issues related to water management, I mean, it really is bringing together on a regional basis all the parties. And I do like the Inland Empire example that you gave in regards to bringing together the developers saying, okay, we do need a housing element here. Well, how do we do it in the most effective way? What are you willing to pay for in this process? What can you do to improve and upgrade our water systems? And how can you be part of the solution? The other half of, I guess, the glass half empty, since we're using that analogy a lot, is just how do you do that in the most affordable manner possible? So the other part, and it gets into big tax policy and Prop 13 and everything, but right now in California, we are feeing up our building side to the point of oblivion. So I'll give you a sense of how challenging this is, and this is where Sigma and other things come to play in an effort to address water quality and water needs, school needs, art needs, library needs, pension needs. We are building as much as $500,000 in parts of the state into basically fees, and a lot of this does include water, to make sure that when you build that home, everything's in place to sustain that housing unit. Well, in most states, when the average housing cost is $260,000 for the entire home, and it costs $500,000 per lot with fees, that's where you pretty much push out low income completely, and you're starting to push out middle class citizens almost entirely. So it is that balance when you look at some of these different issues. The last thing I'll say is we would love to see an integration of regulatory oversight, and a lot of this is water related when we build. So we'll get support from the local government, everyone's happy, city's happy, then we go to the county, they're happy, then we go to the state, and they're like, no, they're all a bunch of idiots in the local level. I kid you not. And then we leave the state, and it doesn't matter whether it's Mr. Obama or Mr. Trump. They'll both say, well, the state of California and local governments are idiotic because we at the Army Corps of Engineers know far more than they do. And then the Army Corps demands certain things, and we go back to the city, and they're like, well, you've totally pulled the rug out. This is not what you agreed to. It's like, well, they told us to make this change, and we need to get intergovernmental relations, that course you took, and if you're a political scientist, everybody's sitting in a room saying, we want CEQA, we want water, we want environmental protection, but we want that on a city, county, state, and federal level simultaneously. And that's why Tejon Ranch, Newhall Ranch, taken 25 years to plan and not built a single home. So when you put all that together with Sigma and all those aspects, we need that regional development, intergovernment relations to make the building of homes more affordable, the water goals achievable, and to move our agenda forward as a state to provide shelter for our people.
Okay, so we're about to open it up to the audience for your questions to the panel, but before that, we have the lightning round question. Each panelist gets to briefly answer this question. It can be no longer than your typical elevator ride, and this is not a tall building, so keep that in mind. Okay, so we're going to start, we'll just go left to right. So we'll start with Denise and then proceed down. And each of you get to answer this question. If you want me to repeat the question, just let me know. So here's your lightning round question. If you get to ride in an elevator with our new governor and pitch him one policy priority related to water and a strong economy, what would that policy priority be? All right, Denise, go.
Governor Newsom, let's advance water equity that advances the environment, our economy, and equity.
Okay, Hala.
The state has started on some very exciting partnership with local governments on water projects, such as the WISP, and these are future or forward-looking projects. We need your support to help us take away some of the obstacles in our way so that we can manage water differently in California.
Okay, Dan.
So congratulations, condolences, Mr. Newsom. Thank you for your ambitious goal of building 3.5 million homes. That's, we call it BHAG, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. Thank you for that. Please bring together with your charisma and your leadership, local, state, and federal governments to bring together a regulatory regime that allows you to achieve your housing goals.
Okay, Lorelei.
Governor Newsom, it's time for the legislator to look at the housing element laws, at housing laws, and what you're requiring, and let's get water aligned with that. Let's get SIGMA aligned with that. Let's look at the Williamson Act. Let's put all of our land to work productively, but let's make sure that we're not hamstringing your housing goals with a water policy that hasn't taken into account land use.
Okay. Ding, the door's opened. Governor Newsom has gone to his next meeting. But there's this entire audience here who happens to be on the floor that you ended up at, and they're ready to ask you some questions. So, is there a mic traveling about, or are we doing this? There are mics. Okay, so I'll wait for, I can't really, okay, now I can see. Okay, so just, I would say find somebody and offer them the microphone, and yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm just wondering if any of you folks in the green building industry have your eye on atmospheric water generators and their evolution and future.
Okay, didn't that just win a large prize? So, has anybody heard of this? There was a recent prize awarded, I think $1 million grant on an atmospheric water generator.
Yes, we're honestly keeping our eyes on all new possibilities of getting water, but many of these are extremely expensive, and within the public sector, we're not going to make huge investments that are not 100% going to pay back. So we are keeping an eye, and innovation is something that we're looking at with many other partners. But like I said, it's important that this technology, beyond the prize, that in fact it is implemented in other places and it has track record before we start thinking of investing in it.
Okay, another question.
I've heard the subject of regulations mentioned several times up here. Regulations are many times a substitution for externality costs that are not taken into account in any other way. Can you individually address the relationship between regulations and externalities that relate to air quality, water quality, soil quality, and the environmental impact to a region where you're proposing solutions? Thank you.
Who wants to take that one, panel?
I'll just touch on that. I mean, a couple of things that come to mind is when you look to build housing, is that something that should be done solely by the new home buyer, or should that be something done by society in general? And having worked for politicians for much of my life, nobody wants to raise taxes, generally speaking. And so you tend to go for the home builder because they kind of hide those fees. So we still feel there needs to be a comprehensive approach to addressing those externalities. And if they really are things that need to be addressed, like inadequate pensions, should the new home buyer be paying for that? Whether it is water systems, integration to us, it needs to be a community-wide discussion. Certainly the new home builder has to play a part in that. It has to be part of that solution. But when we look at those issues, we're focusing all of that into the new home buyer. And just one quick summary on that. When you do that, and you put on those fees and externalities, two things happen. You pay that to the government, the price of that home goes up, so your tax base goes up with it. And then you have to finance that, so you pay an interest on the tax on top of the fee. And so it really has a triple impact on the home buyer. And so the more narrow we focus that, the more difficult we make it to build sustainable homes in this state. So it does require, we think, a broader footprint. That requires a lot of courage, though, from the political leaders to say that, because right now, if you can stick a $500,000 fee on a new home, it's just that one home buyer, who's not a voter yet, by the way, and the home builder. So, I mean, that's our current process of dealing with those externalities in a very collective way that's very costly.
Yeah, I might address that a little differently. You know, I think that we are not really focusing on the real challenge that we are facing in the state and in this country, and that is this notion of the growth engine, and that we have to continue to grow, and that we can continue to extract our natural resources without consequences. And so your question really gets into how do we do life cycle accounting for growth and development so that we actually see what the outputs and the throughputs are in terms of all of our investments. Because the reality is we are going to have to conserve. We're going to have to recognize the precious nature of water and our entire environment, and that we cannot continue to exploit it in the way that we have. And it may cost us. It will cost us. We'll have to, and the higher the price is, the more we start thinking about the precious nature of these resources and how we conserve it. I mean, even to the extent that we look at our affordable housing units today, I mean, or all of our existing buildings, new construction is going to be efficient, but we have to create efficiencies in existing buildings as well to begin to conserve resources. It becomes really a challenge when you look at disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and how they may actually be priced out of the cost of doing resources, using these resources. But we disproportionately are taxed in terms of our utility bills, paying 12 to 15% of our household budget for utilities compared to 3 to 5% of the average household, but we use less water and we use less energy. So how do we begin to mitigate that and make sure that we bear the burden of these externalities, whether it's healthcare costs, you know, from lead in water or whatever the uses are, but also find a way to make it equitable across all communities?
I want to address one item that's really becoming more and more critical, I think, here in California, and that is rate increase fatigue. It is really getting to a point where it's really difficult for any politician to vote for a rate increase and then not lose their seat in the subsequent election. As a matter of fact, in this last election, I had several, a board member who walked home to home talking to people. And some folks are confused, as you can imagine, with all these propositions that are on the ballot. But specifically on the water bond proposition, they're like, I'm tired for paying for water. I'm not getting anything else for that. And it's a reality that we need to start getting smarter. The conversation, we've talked about water infrastructure, and so on. During drought, people were listening. But that conversation has sort of stopped. I'm talking about the normal person out there. We need to be creative in reaching out our customers and continuously talking about the needs that we have. With new regulations, the increase of costs, we need to make sure that there's ongoing continuous support for those rate increases and getting the acceptance out there. Otherwise, all these wonderful things that we're talking about, they are not going to happen if we don't have the support to increase rates.
Question over here.
So I appreciate all the comments, especially Lorelei, on the need for a better linkage of land use and water policy. But I question how we get boards of supervisors as opposed to just staff saying those things. And I'll give you an example. I think Sigma largely could be seen as a failure of counties who had all the authorities they needed that had to be given to groundwater sustainability agencies to manage groundwater. And counties successfully resisted having any responsibility in the Sigma Act. So how do we get to boards of supervisors actually making land use decisions that solve some of these problems that really aren't water problems, but land use decisions, as opposed to just talking about it?
Well, you'll be glad to know that because of Sigma, the issue now is how do you monetize that land? And you have those property owners going to their elected officials and saying, what do I do with this land? So that's where you can get into a land use conversation. You know, Kern County actually has a Sigma basin up near China Lake Naval Weapons Station. It's a closed basin. LADWP runs water through it, but it's not going to stay there. And so 2 years ago, we spent $500,000 and we rezoned and redesignated 27,000 acres over the objections of the people. We've never done that before. We didn't get sued. At the end of the day, they were all happy because we worked individually with them to figure out what are you going to be able to do besides grow something? Because we had to get, agriculture's not sustainable in that particular valley, and China Lake Naval Weapons Station is challenged if we don't do something. But that just shows the kind of effort it takes, and I think it was an eye-opener for the elected officials who suddenly realized that a landowner cannot no longer just, well, I'm going to plant something, that'll work. The building industry has dealt with this forever. They can't just walk in and build an apartment or build a house. You can build one house in Kern County. So I think it's just like Sigma has changed the landscape. I think it's changed that conversation. However, to ask an elected official to say, look, we're going to take hundreds of thousands of acres of land and it's going to be worth nothing is not going to work. So we have to be innovative planners. We're planners, and that's what we're paid to do, is be innovative and look to see what other land uses can we do, and how can the state legislature help with that re-evaluation? You know, do we need new general plan policies? I think we actually need to look at things like SB, you know, like Costa and the 20-year wet and dry. All of those need to be back on the table. I think that the way we manage land use and the way we manage water now, because of Sigma, we're doing all this planning, we're doing all these plans. Where's the linkage that allows a builder to come in and say, I'm compliant with the GSA, why can't I build? Why do I have to go through a big old water supply assessment again? Why do I have to do all these things? If you want to solve this housing crisis, you've got to get it realigned with where we're going with Sigma. I think that's the hook where local elected officials will be excited to get into that conversation because they're going to have property owners, developers, and others who are supportive of that.
We have a question in the back.
Jeff, dealing with the legislatures, the last bond measure, I think, was finally actually utilized this last year of distribution of funds. The other side I will offer to you is Blackish Water as water resource. What is your thoughts on that?
Could you clarify the question again?
Last 2 years watching the legislators dealing with the last water bond and what processes had to go through to finally get it basically sold and begin to utilize it. It took that long from the last water bond measure that was made to actually getting produced and out there. Wondering what ways you think might be better and more efficiently to deal with the legislators on bonds, because there's so many bonds that have not even been sold, much less utilized.
Okay, I think I understand. So Prop 1 was a pretty exhausting process to identify eligible storage projects for Prop 1 funding. And there certainly was a lot of frustration expressed via the media about how that process unfolded. Prop 3 would have been different in the sense that it was going to use a grant model that was intended to be more streamlined. And I guess the question is, what's your recommendations or your thoughts on how, if the state is raising money from taxpayers to fund water infrastructure development, what's the most efficient way in which the state can collect and distribute that money?
So from my perspective, I think the state really should be concentrating on funding projects that are pilot in nature, creative approaches to solving water issues, and not creating slush funds for run-of-the-mill type of projects that the locality was going to be doing anyways, and this is just sort of supplementing some of the funds. To me, that is the smartest way of using money. The WISA process, you know, the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, went with an application that truly is very different and very creative. By storing water in the region, we then free up water behind Oroville for salmon in the river. And this was not an easy thing to come up with. So they challenged us with the language that they had, and we had to put our thinking cap and talk to a lot of the regional folks around us to come up with this project that not only is going to help the state and the fish, but in fact will be investing in infrastructure that will connect a lot of the basins that we have and will make us more sustainable and reliable into the future. When we succeed, I'm not going to say if we succeed, when we succeed, this would really be a great footprint and example for many other regions in the state. Now, I know that this was a very it was like giving birth. I have 2 children, so it felt like giving birth. It was a very difficult process to go through, but great things that move us forward are never easy. So I appreciate the work that the state has done. I would not want to be in the shoes of the California Water Commissioners who had to sit there and watch people call them different names and so on. And I am hoping and hopeful that the result would really move the needle forward to have these creative projects and help us manage urban needs, agriculture needs, and environmental needs all at the same time.
Lorelei, and I think then you'll have the last word because we're out of time. So go ahead.
I heard a second question about cleaning up water. Kern County is ground zero for pilot projects. I have so many innovative water treatment projects, but we have 25 million acre-feet of brackish, salty water along the edge of the San Joaquin Valley. We need to get into gear. We need to help streamline innovative pilot projects. And I'd just like to say, I think that you're absolutely right about we should have more pilot projects. I think that the Regional Water Quality Control Board and others should look at the CEC and the CPUC. They actually can move pilot projects. I have tons of their projects as well because Kern County is ground zero for renewable energy in the state. And I think there's something about how they do their grants and how they do their projects that the water board side should look at, because they actually can move those projects through the system, figure out which ones work, and get the money out.
Okay. So I think that's our time. Am I correct, Carlos? Yes, we're out of time, but I want to thank you very much for your great questions, and I really want to thank the panelists for taking time today and giving us your expertise and your thoughts on this very important subject. So thank you.